Welcome, everybody. Good morning. My name is Amy Blaymore Paterson, and I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut Land Conservation Council. We are delighted to be offering this workshop entitled Nature and Policy for Resilient Connecticut as part of Sustainability and Resiliency Week here in Connecticut. Thanks for coming. Before I turn this program over to Robert LaFrance, who will be moderating the presentation today, I just want to do some housekeeping here and also introduce one of our new staff members here at CLCC who will be helping to guide us through the program today as well. For the presentation, we ask that you keep your screens off. I'm going to turn mine off in just a minute, and also stay muted. We will be holding questions till the end, so please be sure to write your questions in the chat, and we will follow those along and read them at the end, and Robert will assign them to the appropriate speaker to help answer. We are recording this, as you know, and that's pretty much it. If for some reason we lose the signal, just come back into your same Zoom link and we will restart. But other than that, I think we're ready to go. Rebecca Dorsey, I just want to introduce her. She is our new Sandy Breslin Conservation Fellow, a graduate student at the University of Connecticut. She will be assisting CLCC throughout the year with all of our advocacy work and really hit the ground running by helping to put this presentation together. She'll be monitoring the chat for questions and also running the show. So thank you all for coming. And now I'm going to turn it over to Robert.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks for attending today. We really appreciate your time and effort and your interest in this topic. Rebecca, if you go to the next slide, please. I'm Robert LaFrance. I'm the Director of Policy for Audubon, Connecticut. We are the National Audubon Society's state office. We have a state office that's in both New York and Connecticut. And the next slide, please. So why are we here? What's the point of our discussion today? What is nature-based solutions all about? So one of the things I want to clarify we're discussing today is the difference between nature-based solutions and natural climate solutions. When folks started taking a look at the science behind natural climate solutions, the question was put, what kind of benefit can we get from a climate perspective by basically managing and taking care of nature in the appropriate way? And one of the things we've learned from the science, and you can take a look at Grissom's report here, which we've looked at extensively, that basically what we can do is the natural climate solutions can provide over 1/3, I'm going to repeat that, over 1/3 of the cost-effective climate mitigation needed between now and 2030 to stabilize warming at below 2% Celsius. In essence, the other benefit of this is what we'll hear more about today. The co-benefits of using natural climate solutions are biodiversity benefits. And the National Audubon Society actually took a look at these issues some time ago and decided they would come together and pull together a report. And if we go to the next slide, please. That report was our Natural Climate Solutions report. And in essence, it worked on and took advantage of some of the science that we'd already seen and started to offer policy solutions for using nature-based solutions, or what we were referring to at the time as natural climate solutions, which has now been broadened to incorporate more concepts. And we now use the term nature-based solutions. So it's not just the climate benefits, it's the other ancillary benefits, which some of our other speakers will be talking about today. So what are we talking about? Things like restoring coastal wetlands, things like avoiding coastal conversions, things like reducing man-made nutrient inputs. Think about a living shoreline as a really good example of a nature-based or natural climate solution. It basically helps us deal with some of the issues with regard to the water-facing part, which allows for improvement in biodiversity, but it also allows for prevention of erosion and will help with soil health and to be able to store blue carbon. Other things we can take a look at are interior freshwater wetland restoration. And when we hear from Alicea, she'll be talking a lot about some of these issues. Protecting and avoided conversion or destruction of wetlands. So now we're talking about the inland wetland benefits. And then finally, in terms of our report, we talked about other things that people can do. Green spaces, natural infrastructure, blue infrastructure, native gardens, composting. These are all concepts that we're trying to pull together. And when we talk about the legislation later today, we'll talk about some of the things we're trying to do. Next slide, please. So as I indicated before, one of the benefits is that we're looking at not only the benefit of carbon sequestration and storage, but also the benefit of biodiversity and protection. And I do want to point out that in Massachusetts, for example, they've made it a priority to try and deal with the biodiversity question. We have two crises that we're dealing with today, the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis. And we've been watching the work that's happening in Massachusetts, where they're taking a whole of government approach to government, to looking at protecting key habitats, restoring habitats and species, sustaining ecosystems, and connecting human beings to the process. The other point I want to make is that this is not only a government exercise. There are private entities now getting into this space and working. And I want to highlight one company called Superorganism, who's basically using private capital, much like the Green Bank, to try and solve some of these difficult problems in terms of biodiversity and carbon sequestration. So this is all by way of background for some of our other speakers who are going to get in greater detail on the individual specific scientific basis of this. I hope I provided a general overview of where we're going to go in this discussion today. And if we could go to the next slide, please. And now I'm going to introduce Denise Savageau, a colleague who we've worked with for a long time. And it's all yours, Denise.
Thanks, Rob. Hi, everybody. Good to be here today with everyone. So I'm Denise Savageau, and I'm the president of the Connecticut Association of Conservation Districts. I also happen to be the Connecticut chair of the Connecticut Council on Soil and Water Conservation. So this is kind of nature-based solutions are right up my alley. And I think with me and a lot of the team members, we were part of the Governor's Council on Climate Change and really looking at these nature-based solutions and what we needed to do. And as Robert said, it's really looking at this intersection of climate change and biodiversity and where we need to go with this. So next slide, please. So when we talk about the importance of nature-based solutions, we really need to look at all of the ecosystem services that they provide. So for example, when we're talking about our natural lands, we've got inland wetlands, tidal wetlands, we've got near coastal waters, inland waters, forests, soils, and even our agricultural lands that we use. So just wanted to point out that there's a whole lot of ecosystem services they provide. So if I'm looking at soils, for example, you know, they help us with food supply, but they also filter our water. They provide for water storage. There's a whole host of things that they provide. And when we're talking about climate change mitigation, this carbon that is stored in our soils is really, really important. We can say the same thing for forests. We can say the same thing for wetlands. And particularly we're looking at wetlands, you know, people think about the water, they think about the plants, but it's the wetland soils that really store the carbon. Those highly organic carbon soils do a lot of work for us. So they both mitigate for climate change with that carbon sequestration, but then they provide low-cost solutions to the adaptation and resiliency to climate change. And they're also, if we protect these ecosystem services, we're maintaining and restoring biodiversity. So these multiple benefits are really, really important as we move forward. And so when we're talking about green infrastructure, we're talking about ecosystems. We're not talking about just a simple rain garden or something like that, although those could be part of it. We're talking about this bigger infrastructure of intact wetlands, keeping forest as forest. Next slide, please. So I want to make sure that people understand this confluence, this intersection of climate change and biodiversity, because climate change is a major driver of the erosion of biodiversity. And so when the climate is changing, we know that we're losing some of those ecosystem services. But the flip side of that is if we protect the environment and protect our ecosystems, they are solutions to climate change. So we have this, what comes first, the chicken or the egg, and this confluence. We really will not be able to do what we need to do in terms of climate change mitigation and adaptation without protecting biodiversity. Soils function because soils are, people think about soils as just being dirt. They think about it just being sand, sandy. It's highly organic and highly living, and there's more biodiversity in soil than probably any other ecosystem on Earth. So when we talk about this, it's really important to provide those services. When we're talking about that water gets treated and filtered in soil, we're talking about that biodiversity of the soil. Next, please. So let's just talk about climate change and what ecosystems are really being impacted. So, the predictions, particularly specifically, I should say, for Connecticut, that was done by the Connecticut Institute for Resilience and Climate Adaptation, are telling that we're going to have an increase in overall temperature and the number of extreme heat days. Obviously, going to be impacting our ecosystems. Sea level rise, obviously impacting our coastal area. So we're going to be seeing, a 0.8 foot we already saw, I should say, we already saw in the past 100 years, 0.8 feet. And we're expecting another 1 foot in 50 years and another 2 to 4 feet in 100 years. That's a huge change along our coast. I think everybody is very aware of the changes to our hydrologic cycle. Last year was classic, and right now we are in a drought. But we tend to have this drought and flooding sometimes in the same year. And what we're calling, flash flooding. Everybody knows about flash flooding, but we're now talking about flash droughts, where all of a sudden we get into droughty conditions really quickly because we had a flash flood. We had 4 or 5 inches of rain in one day. It can't all infiltrate into the ground. We don't get the storage. It all runs off, and so we end up having this cycle. So then when we get a drought, that flash drought happens very quickly. And then so it's the changes in the severity and frequency of storms and larger storm events is something we're seeing. So we really need to be paying attention to that. And if you listen to what I'm saying, it's like the impacts on ecosystems, particularly our water ecosystems, is really happening. And so the solutions are, how do we protect those? Next slide, please. So in one of the original climate change reports that DEEP released, it talked about what our most imperiled habitats are, and they are all related to water. These are our most important imperiled habitats in Connecticut. The light blue is freshwater, the dark blue is coastal, but we're talking about cold water streams, freshwater wetlands, major rivers, forested swamps, tidal marshes, open marine water, beaches and dunes, offshore islands. These are all our most imperiled habitats. If we protect these and the ecosystem surfaces, though, think about that, then we're also protecting the biodiversity. We're also mitigating for climate change. Next slide. And so I said the good news is that these same ecosystems that are most imperiled will also provide nature-based solutions. So those, again, healthy organic soils that provide us with carbon sequestration, food supply, water filtration, really important. Our wetlands and our riparian zones, they moderate those flood waters. They protect us against drought. They make us more resilient to climate change. And again, those healthy organic soils and wetlands are key for climate change mitigation with carbon sequestration. Intact forests, keeping forest as forest, all of those ecosystems that forests provide, including climate moderation, our temperatures. We all know, who hasn't taken a walk in the forest in the wintertime and said, oh my God, it was so cold at my house and now I'm walking in the forest and it's not as cold, because they provide wind breaks in the against wind. They moderate our climate. Similarly, they give us shade in the summer, protecting us from that heat island impact. We know that they sequester carbon and store carbon. They help protect our watersheds. So keeping forest as forest and all of the ecosystem services they provide. Similarly, all of these wetlands, forests, or whatever, are in open space. So this open space, not only protecting it, but stewarding it, making sure that we're managing this land and making sure that we're doing restoration where we need to. And then I've talked about, mostly, upland and interior things that we need to do, but our coastal waters, our oyster reefs, and our shellfish beds are critical for maintaining ecosystem services in terms of water filtration, in terms of, carbon sequestration. All those shells have a lot of carbon in them. So these are same things we need to be looking at in our coastal areas. So I'm going to be passing this on. I think that's my last slide. Next. Oh, no, I have one more. I wanted to make sure I touch base on the Long Island Sound Partnership. This is a new program. So we're going to be talking a little bit about, the science, which I just did, but also about some of the programs we're seeing. And the Long Island Sound Partnership, formerly called the Long Island Sound Study, it's in its 40th year, and we just have a new comprehensive conservation management plan that was adopted in June. And the significance of this from the nature-based solutions is for the first time when this plan, their goal for water quality in Long Island Sound is really looking at watershed health. And watershed health depends on all things we talked about, nature-based solutions, protecting biodiversity, and looking at the impacts of climate on Long Island Sound. So we're really excited about this. These other topics here, nutrients, pathogens, toxic contaminants, marine debris, they've all been in the Long Island Sound study for a long time. But this idea of looking at healthy watersheds and nature-based solutions is really important. I'm leading a work group on this, and we're really excited about this. And we're excited about the work that we're going to be talking about later in this presentation about the nature-based solutions and the work in Connecticut in general. So now I'm going to pass this on, next slide, to my colleague Alicea Charamut.
Thanks, Denise. Hi, everyone. Alicea Charamut. I'm the Executive Director of Rivers Alliance of Connecticut. We focus on policy, advocacy, and education around all water issues. Our name is a little bit of a misnomer. We work on rivers, lakes, streams, groundwater, drinking water, because water touches everything and everything touches water. I'm just going to start out with a quick story. Every summer, my family rented a cabin in Maine. And one year, as she always does, my dog bolted out of the car to jump in the lake. And soon after, I realized there was an active algal bloom on the lake. That evening and night, she was very restless, acting, out of sorts. And I was up all night worrying. Was that a toxic algal bloom? Is she having side effects from this? Took her to the vet the next day. Thankfully, she got a clean bill of health. It was just a panic attack. But we shouldn't have to worry whether our water is clean enough for us to enjoy. And right now, we need to be deploying every tool we have in our toolbox to keep our waters clean and safe as we face the impacts of climate change. And as it currently stands, we are not focusing enough on protecting nature so it can protect us. And one of our biggest failings is our lack of protections for the areas immediately along our waterways. And that brings us to talking about a very specific issue, which is riparian buffers. Next slide, please. So, wilding our edges and these riparian buffer areas, having these vegetated buffers along our waterways are the superhero we need for clean waters and resilient communities. Next slide. I'm just going to do a quick riparian buffer 101. As you can see, the stream channel is in the middle. This could be any waterway, it could be a lake and a pond. The riparian area comes out on each side of that, and the upland area beyond that. What you see right along the edge is the buffer area. It is when you have this vegetation and forests, native plants and shrubs, or native-like plants and shrubs, you have this buffer. Next slide, please. And what the ecosystem services that these buffers provide are just, they're numerous. They provide filtration from pollutants like nitrogen, phosphorus, all the nasties that can get into our waterways. They provide erosion control because those roots hold the soils so that when you have these big runoff events, you have less erosion. They shade the streams, protecting our cold water habitats. They allow for groundwater recharge because they slow that stormwater down instead of running right off into open water. They sequester carbon because there are green areas. They are wildlife habitat and wildlife corridors. Our bird migration often happens along our waterways, and it offers that habitat for them to stop along the way. And also, they are also an environmental justice element. They have that element because they slow that stormwater down. They help mitigate flooding downstream, and many of our environmental justice communities and vulnerable communities sit at the confluence of our bigger rivers. So, you know, just they provide so much for community safety and the health of our waterways. Next slide, please.
Wow, this is fantastic.
So let's go wild. Let's talk about the features of an effective buffer. So native and native-like trees. When I say native-like, I'm talking about plants that are not, you know, they may not be native, but they thrive here. They are not invasive. Again, native like shrubs, native like grasses and wildflowers. These are all part of an effective area that where you can wild the edges of the waterway on your property. Next slide, please. So what about lawns? They're green, right? They're vegetation. Lawns, you know, this is a hard thing to talk about because we love our lawns in the United States, but the Great American Lawn is the nemesis of clean waterways. The roots are too shallow to hold soil well, so they don't help with erosion. They're poor filters. They don't absorb and filter pollutants like native vegetation and wild vegetation does. The runoff is too fast. They're just not good at slowing it down. And the wildlife habitat is very limited. Lawns are a monoculture. They actually help decrease biodiversity instead of increasing it. So we really need to think the Great American Lawn, especially along our waterways. Next slide, please. You know, there has been a lot, as we went through the legislative session this year, there were folks talking about how any move toward protecting and restoring riparian buffers were going to alter people's views of the water. And this picture in the foreground shows a vegetated area along this pond with the grass in the background. Which looks better? I think the area in the foreground looks much better than the area in the background. And there are a lot of states where there are excellent examples, and Maine being a really good one of them, where there are you can phase in any cutting of an area along a waterway so that you have the views, but still, excuse me, still maintaining that effective buffer along the waterway. And also it really improves the view shed from the water looking out for those who are enjoying a lake or a pond. Next slide, please. So buffers, they're a BBB, the good kinds. They're beautiful, they have big impact, and they are the best bang for your buck. So this is a table from the Bantam Lake watershed-based plan. Now, Bantam Lake has been plagued with algal blooms. And this table shows all of the best management practices that they're looking at to help to address those harmful algal blooms on the lake. And on the right-hand side, you can see there is a cost per pound of phosphorus reduced. Phosphorus is the main culprit for harmful algal blooms, and that's why they're focusing on that for the Bantam Lake Watershed Plan. And as you can see, the structural BMPs are very expensive. We're looking at the tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars. The institutional BMPs, very important, but they're also very expensive in the tens of thousands. And the cheapest way to help reduce phosphorus loads into Bantam Lake is through riparian buffer improvement. And that number is for restoration. Protecting them and leaving them there is free. Next slide, please. So we're missing an opportunity here in Connecticut to really capitalize on leveraging this effective and very cost-effective way to keep our waters clean and safe. Connecticut is the only state in New England that doesn't have specific statewide setbacks for riparian areas. And what we really need to do is establish these zones with a focus on maintaining native vegetation and native-like vegetation in these areas. Otherwise, we are going to continue to have to spend millions of dollars on fixing problems if we don't focus on good policy that is inexpensive, that is going to prevent those problems from happening down the line. So I am going to now hand this over to Amy Paterson, and I look forward to questions later on. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alicia. All right. Again, I'm Amy Paterson. I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut Land Conservation Council. For those of you that are not familiar with CLCC, we are the umbrella organization for Connecticut's 120 or so land trusts with a mission to strengthen and elevate land conservation. We're the only statewide land trust service organization in Connecticut, and we provide the land trust with a myriad of services, including technical and financial assistance, opportunities for learning, networking, collaboration, and advocacy. And each year, CLCC puts together an annual legislative priority list, and we are generally focused on land conservation and nature-based solutions. Next slide, please. So much of what I have here has already been said, but it's worth underscoring. We need nature. Certainly my colleagues have done a great job of outlining why, and I don't think anybody really would ever disagree. Interesting, when I was testifying in support of HB 5004, which is the climate action bill that Eric Hammerling will talk a bit about later in the presentation, and I was focused specifically on the section on nature-based solutions, and I was asked by Representative John Michael Parker, who is the co-chair of the committee, and he said, well, what are nature-based solutions? And I thought, well, that's a great question. And my response was, start by looking at the land conservation work of your local land trust. Forests, trees, wetlands, riparian buffers, healthy soils, the natural and working lands that land trusts are protecting every day are nature-based solutions to many of our environmental and societal challenges. And I was also asked about the whys. And the whys are because nature needs us, that despite all the benefits that we have here and that I have listed here and that you have also heard about through my colleagues, despite all of these, nature is at risk and it needs us. The stats are sobering at every level. Globally, the United Nations has reported that 1 million of the world's estimated 8 million species of plants and animals are threatened with extinction, and 75% of the Earth's land surface has been significantly altered by human actions, including 85% of wetland areas. Nationally, according to the Land Trust Alliance, and that is the national umbrella for the nation's land trust, there's about 1,700 land trusts in the country. LTA reports that roughly 150 acres of natural land and 40 acres of farmland are lost every hour. Every hour. That is staggering. And in Connecticut, we have a microcosm of what is happening globally and nationally. And of course, what I just cited to you are just a couple of statistics. You can go really deep and really find out how extensive the problems are by looking at the myriad of studies that are out there. We have not met the state's 21% land conservation goal, and according to the Council on Environmental Quality, it's going to take us decades to do so. And, you know, query whether by then it will be too late. Core forests and prime farmland are being lost at an alarming rate. We've lost about 120,000 acres of the largest, most ecologically valuable forests over the past 30 years in Connecticut. Farmland, similarly, we have lost as well. I think Connecticut ranks in the top 4th of the number of acres lost in the country. And I would direct you to the subgroup reports of the Governor's Council on Climate Change. I was part of the forest subgroup. Denise and Alicea and Robert were part of others. And there's a lot of data in there that talks about, you know, these disturbing trends here in Connecticut and how we can try to address them. Wildlife and plant life are also struggling. There's over 600 species of plants and animals listed as endangered, threatened, special concern due to destruction and fragmentation of our state's habitats, proliferation of invasive species, impacts of climate change, and finally, wetlands. Our wetlands are declining. We've lost about 65% here in Connecticut, both inland and coastal. And this clearly is unsustainable. Next slide, please. So nature needs a voice, and at every level, there has been a call to action to save our natural systems. And the consensus is that conservation is key to saving biodiversity, increasing resilience, and mitigating against the effects of climate change. Globally, nature-based solutions continues to take, as a concept, continues to take the center stage at the United Nations Climate Change Conferences, or COP, Conference of the Parties. It was at in 2028, excuse me, at COP28, COP29, and then coming up in November is COP30. And interestingly, that will focus on shifting from conversations around climate ambition, including the use of nature-based solutions to address climate change and biodiversity, but to implementation. And that's very exciting to hear that we're starting to look to walk the walk as opposed to continuing to talk the talk and have a lot of reports, but not doing much with them. Nationally, we were heading that way with nature-based solutions. We had many policies and executive orders and legislation in place that helped to prioritize nature-based solutions, including protection of old growth and mature forests and many other things. And you'll see that I put strike-through marks across all of those. We have presented this before, and last year it was a much more optimistic slide because we were heading in the right direction. But as you know, we have been facing rescissions, repeals, diversions, budgetary crises, et cetera, that have really, to put it mildly, caused us to take a big step back at the federal level. So now, more than ever then, acting at the state level is that much more critical. You know, last year when we talked about this, I highlighted some of the other states that were already setting policy and funding programs to prioritize nature-based solutions. I've listed just a few of them here. There are definitely more out there. And notably, as Robert had mentioned, Massachusetts is implementing a comprehensive program pursuant to the governor's executive order there, directing a whole of government approach to biodiversity conservation with an emphasis on nature-based solutions. And Massachusetts just released its biodiversity goals report, and I encourage you to take a look at that. We'll put some resources together after this presentation and have them available to you if you want a quick link to some of the reports that we are citing. So here in Connecticut, let's go to the next slide. Last year, we were really rallying the cry to pass several bills that would implement so much of what was already there set by Foundation through executive orders. We have the GC3 Phase 1 report, the Forest Action Plan, Wildlife Action Plan, the Perfect Future Working Group report, which was a follow-up to the Forest Subgroup report at the Governor's Council on Climate Change. We have the Green Plan, or the Comprehensive Open Space Strategy, which we'll be working on revising this year. We have a tremendous tremendous foundation to take action here in Connecticut. And we needed to pass some bills to get there. And now, with the legislative victories, next slide, we're ready to do that. And this is a very, very exciting time for us. So these three bills are the bills that my colleagues are going to talk about. They were priorities for all of us at the last legislative session. For those of you that testified and supported these bills, thank you. Your voices really made a difference. For the legislators who might be here with us, thank you for voting in favor of these bills, getting them across the finish line and allowing them to go to Governor Lamont to sign into law. So with that, I'm going to turn this back over to Robert LaFrance, who will start us off on SB 9.
Thanks, Amy. And I want to thank everybody here for all the great presentations we've done thus far. But now we want to let you know what we've done in Connecticut, which I think is significant. Senate Bill number 9 is a fairly extensive omnibus bill. And I saw Joanne Wozniak Brown, who works with the Office of Policy and Management. She was one of the main architects of this bill, but it also came as a result of some of the work that happened on the governor's climate change reporting mechanism, the GC3. And I think it's really important to note there's a lot of elements of that. We could spend literally a whole session on it, but I want to highlight one in particular, and it has to go with something called resilience and resilience districts. I worked on the finance committee of the Governor's Council on Climate Change, and one of the things we looked at is how are we going to finance resilience? And one of the ways we could do that is by utilizing something called a resilience improvement district, which is much like something known as a tax improvement district. Effectively, you create a district, you create a improvement that you want to make, you implement that improvement, and then you use the benefits of the tax increment, the benefit of that project. You actually kick that back and people pay that as a fee over time. This particular section, it's sections, I think it's 21 through 30 of the bill, actually offers that as an option for municipalities. In fact, most of Senate Bill number 9 is empowering municipalities to do the kind of things that we would like to see them do in this resilience and nature-based solutions space. The thing that's particularly unique and beneficial about the sections that I'm talking about is it highlights and sort of encourages, prioritizes nature-based solutions as part of these resilience improvement districts, and we were very, very happy to support it. I encourage folks who haven't looked at it to take a closer look at it, and we'll let Denise speak to some of the more in-depth elements of this because of all the planning. Denise was a planner for Greenwich for a long time and is our inside baseball person on all things planning. Thanks, Denise.
Thanks, Robert. So as Rob said, I was the conservation director for the town of Greenwich and worked very hard on with the whole land use department, including planning and zoning, and was a key person through 2 different updates of the plans of conservation and development. And originally they were called plans of development, and then they added in plans of conservation and development, which really is a wonderful thing about thinking about how we use this. What Senate Bill 9, Public Act number 25-33 does is it encourages folks when they update, or I should say requires folks when they update the plan of conservation and development to include climate change and really focusing on not only the mitigation of climate change, but adaptation and resiliency to climate change. Because this was really looking at climate sustainability from a municipal level in terms of the bill. And so it's asking people to look at their plans of conservation development, what they already have in there, and then what they need to do. So it kind of does that work in terms of, yes, you're going to be protecting open space, but make sure you're protecting open space and doing it from that perspective of not just possibly recreation or wildlife habitat, even though those are both ecosystem services we want, but also, what is it doing for water quality? What is it doing for flooding? What is it doing for soil health? What is it doing for a whole host of other ecosystem services we need? So it really encourages them to look at the nature-based solutions part of planning and what has to happen at the municipal level. And I would just say with most of the work we do, we have state policies, we have federal policies, but we all know that implementation happens at the local level. So encouraging this to be into the plan of conservation and development, which then guides all the land use departments and all the land use planning within a town and the regulatory processes with planning and zoning and inland wetlands, as well as municipal projects themselves. That's what the POCs, is the guidance document for. So we're really excited that we have this new provision in Public Act 25-33. I'm going to turn this over to Alicea because she also would love to make some comments about this particular act, which thank you to Joanna for getting this over the finish line.
Yes, thanks, Joanna. Riparian buffers are specifically called out in the section on nature-based solutions as effective measures for mitigating the effects of impact on our water and wetlands, and also called out as a way to reduce flooding. And so it is specified within the bill, and we very much appreciate that as an acknowledgement of how effective and important the riparian buffers are in resilience in Connecticut. Should I move on to 7174, or do we have more on Public Act 2533?
I think you can move on.
I was going to say the same
Okay.
thing.
And that brings me to what started as 7174 and turned into Special Act 25-12, which we have Mary Mashinsky to thank for. And I believe she is here on this in this webinar. And what 2124 does, it establishes a legislative working group to identify where and how protection of vegetative buffers in the state can be incorporated into statutes and regulations in order to improve the health of and protect the resources of the state's watercourses consistent with private property rights, to respond to the projected impacts of watercourses that are listed in the recommendations of the Governor's Council on Climate Change. And you can go to the bill to see which entities will be serving on that. So we hope that we can have some sort of report out by January 15th, which is the date on in the statute. But it is a huge step forward to get a legislative working group to bring something to the legislature, because this has been it has been contentious in the past, but from what we've been seeing over the years with a lot of the big rainstorms that we've had and an acknowledgement that, we need to do everything we can to make sure that our communities are safe. And with the prevalence of blue-green algal blooms and declining water quality, like I said, and when I started earlier, we need to be using all the tools in our toolbox. And there is definitely a recognition of that now. We don't have to look at it as, a major change. Wilding our areas and making them beautiful is a positive step. It is a positive improvement for property values. And helps maintain the property values of downstream owners. So I'm looking forward to that, and hope that next legislative session we'll all see something that we can move forward on to be able to protect these areas.
Right, and I'm Eric Hammerling. I'm the Director of the Office of Environmental Review and Strategic Initiatives at the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. And on that last bill there that was listed, I'm going to take a little bit of the easy way out, because as many of you know who have joined us today, House Bill 5004 had many different elements to it. I think 17 sections of the bill, that covered issues from zero carbon goals to heat pumps to Clean Economy Council and many others. But we're really just going to be focusing on Section 12 of that legislation. And I actually put in the chat for those of you who are interested just a bill summary of the entire bill. And so we didn't want to do, give it short shrift by trying to do a quick summary of everything, but we'll now be going into some greater detail specifically on Section 12. So if we can go to the next slide. But before kind of jumping right in, I do really want to start by kind of extending my appreciation and admiration to the really outstanding advocates who led off this forum with their presentations. Before starting at DEEP 2 years ago, as I mentioned, as the Office Director for Environmental Review and Strategic Initiatives, I had the privilege of serving for 15 years as the executive director of the Connecticut Forest and Park Association, and prior to that, for another 5 years as the executive director of the Farmington River Watershed Association. And I can tell you from firsthand experience over many years that my fellow panelists today are the absolute best in terms of advocates, in terms of brilliant and incredible people. So I don't want to tear up, but I just have great respect for them. So let's go on to the next slide. So, and of course, it did take the very best advocates to help ensure that nature-based solutions would be part of the bills that, passed and were part of that, widely acclaimed year for climate-related legislation. And I should, before getting into some of the specifics of, what are in Section 12 of Public Act 25-125, I do want to acknowledge right up front that nature-based solutions can be a challenging topic, in part because of some of the many terms that we tend to use somewhat interchangeably and have been used over time in reference to this kind of work. And you heard some of them today. You heard about natural climate solutions. You heard about ecosystem services. You heard about healthy, resilient, and sustainable communities, about natural infrastructure, about green infrastructure, in the GC3 process and the U.S. Climate Alliance. We talked about either natural and working lands or working in natural lands. There are other terms like engineering with nature that are out there, and all can be variations on this general theme, with differences, but at times that can be pretty subtle. I would really say no matter what you call nature-based solutions or subsets of nature-based solutions, we try to recognize at DEEP that these are they are valuable, and they have an important role in any comprehensive agency effort. So, part of what we hope to do today and going forward as part of the nature-based solution is to make sure that we can find a way to more effectively communicate about nature-based solutions and hopefully get more done in support of nature-based solutions together. So, but anyway, about the legislation specifically, there are 5 main elements that require DEEP to lead on an evaluation. And first of all, is to look at how to both integrate and advance nature-based solutions in Connecticut, starting with an emphasis on kind of DEEP programs, but going even beyond that. We are to, in this evaluation, consider various best practices that encourage nature-based solutions. As part of the evaluation, we also are required to consult with 7 other state agencies to ensure kind of broad agency input. There is a requirement for a listening session to receive public input. And then we have a deadline of publishing an evaluation report by July 1st, 2026, next year, on DEEP's website. Next slide. So the legislation largely spells out what is to be called a nature-based solutions initiative, and what is intended to be included there. It is DEEP's efforts to integrate and advance nature-based solutions in the state that support climate change mitigation and adaptation, ecosystem resilience, and biodiversity. And it's doing that through applicable state and federally funded programs. And what are nature-based solutions? Well, nature-based solutions utilize the state's ecosystems to naturally sequester and store carbon, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, increase biodiversity, and protect against climate change impacts. This is very much along the lines of what you heard earlier from my fellow panelists. I think it's helping to carry forward many of the messages that were put on the table just a few minutes ago. Next slide. And of course, the Nature-Based Solutions Initiative includes several existing programs at DEEP. Included here are, in this pie, which is, I have to admit, making me a little bit hungry. But included here are 5 pie slices for those programs that are specifically included in the legislation. Microgrid and Resilience Grant, the Open Space Program, Clean Water Act programs, Long Island Sound Study Program, and Urban Forestry. There's a pie slice for other programs administered by DEEP. And then the last slice shown here is for programs administered by the other state entities that DEEP will be consulting with. And of course, there are other significant efforts that DEEP undertakes that may make sense to include in the evaluation, but that may not fit neatly within this group of funding programs, such as managing state forests and parks and wildlife management areas and the other natural resources that DEEP's ongoing management activities have an influence over. Next slide. The legislation also includes 9 or 10, depending on how you count things, practices that support nature-based solutions in various ways, listed here. To be honest, determining the best way to cover these various practices in the evaluation, will be a challenge, but we're working on this and certainly welcome additional input, especially from folks with some expertise in these areas. But again, amongst these practices, you're seeing things that have been mentioned in earlier presentations, and I think help carry these issues forward. Next slide. And we hope to also show that it's not just programs and practices that in isolation from each other make a difference for nature-based solutions. Rather, it's the nexus between the programs and practices that will be, I think, particularly important to emphasize. Shown here is kind of one crosswalk type visualization that we're working on now internally at DEEP. Don't worry about the specifics here. This is not fully filled out. It's really just meant to give you some insight into what we're thinking about. But the general sense is, we're trying to show, on the left-hand side here, those are the programs that were included in the pie chart shown earlier. And along the top of this crosswalk are the practices. At least the first few practices are kind of distributed across the top. And we're trying to show some distinction between what programs that may have been set up specifically to benefit certain types of practices or objectives, and which may have coincidental benefits. Some, maybe there's a third category of, having, it might be eligible, but not primary, not necessarily, coincidental, but perhaps some eligible benefits. But we want to make sure to represent and recognize the connection between various programs and these practices. We also hope to include, in this type of a crosswalk, not only other DEEP programs, but those other state agency programs that we hope to collect over the next, the coming months as we consult with those other state agencies. Next slide. And of course, I've mentioned a few times, we have this obligation to consult with other state agencies. Who are those agencies? Well, here they are: the Connecticut Green Bank, Department of Agriculture, Department of Housing, Department of Insurance, Department of Public Health, Department of Transportation, Office of Policy and Management. We are kind of in the early phase of initiating contacts with, all of these agencies, and, are really looking forward to some, robust input and conversations, because we want to make sure to, include in the evaluation as much as we can, what these various, sister agencies are doing in the area of nature-based solutions, and, both programs and perhaps practices that can be included in the evaluation. Next slide. So just as, again, a reminder of the overall timeline for the evaluation, we're currently in the information gathering phase of gathering information on various DEEP and other state agency programs. We'll be building out that information on various practices outlined in the legislation, connecting those programs and practices through mechanisms like the crosswalk that I just shared. As the calendar turns into 2026, in just a couple months, it will be kind of moving into more of a public input opportunity, culminating with a formal listening session that'll probably happen next May or June, to be able to allow for a kind of a more formal opportunity for public input before the report itself is due by July 1st, 2026, where it will be published on DEEP's website. Next slide. So I honestly, do look forward to hearing from you. I hope you're interested enough in this topic to participate, and just want to thank you for your attendance today, and thanks to the entire panel. And with that, I think we're going to open up for some questions, but I'll turn it over to Rob, who I think was going to moderate that.
Great. Eric, I just want to thank you for your kind words about the panel, but we feel the same way about you, and we could not be happier that the administration and the commissioner has selected you to lead this effort within the organization. We're very fortunate to have you there, and we all look forward to working with you to make certain this initiative actually gets some strong legs and we do some really good work with it. So with that, I only saw one question in the chat. If folks are thinking about doing more with it, that'd be great. Rebecca, did you want to read that question to us and then see if other people want to add to that?
Sure. So this question comes from Eric. It is Connecticut an outlier with riparian setbacks because we regulate wetlands at the local or municipal level as opposed to the state level?
I think Alicea is going to answer this one because she knows it.
No, because other states like our neighbor Massachusetts actually operates in the same way. They have their conservation commissions that review inland wetlands issues, and in Connecticut, it's more because we have upland review areas in Connecticut as opposed to buffer areas like other groups have, where activities are regulated within that area. And if you look at the Massachusetts regulations for their inland wetlands and watercourses, vegetation is mentioned dozens of times. We do not have specific protections for the vegetated areas around our watercourses and wetland, or watercourses. Wetlands, watercourses is where we need it. Wetlands kind of do that job on their own. So, and if you look at some other states, it may not be in their Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Act, but perhaps in their Shoreline Protection Acts. Maine has some good examples, as well as New Hampshire. I don't know, Denise, if you also want to chime in on that as well.
Yeah, Alicia, I think you did a good job, and I agree. I don't think it's because we regulate at the local level. Other states do that as well. But I do think there has been this hesitation, and we have challenges right now where people, Connecticut's a small state. We have, and land values are very high. So one of the struggles we always look at when we're doing any kind of regulation is are we taking away someone's ability to use their land? And we have to balance that taking issue and that private property rights issue with the public good, the public trust. And the public trust is what we're trying to protect. So how do we get there? And that's and finding that fine balance. And I think Connecticut's very it looks at that very closely. Not that other states don't, but I think that there's been some type of a hesitation there. We were the leader on the Federal Clean Water Act is modeled after Connecticut's Clean Water Act, right? So we were the leader in this. We were the first ones to pass a comprehensive inland wetlands program. And, so I think, but we've found that, so I think some of the thing is we found a little bit of a backlash against that, but we really need people to look at these nature-based solutions, riparian buffers, but just the whole way. I mean, even, we've seen potential rollbacks of the Wetlands Act, and it's been being attacked, and we're celebrating all these positive wins we've had, but those of us who work in the legislative have been doing that. So I think we really need people to say, like, you know what, if we are going to tackle climate change and we're going to do this resiliency piece, we need to make sure that we, take a hard look at riparian buffers as one of the nature-based solutions that we're promoting.
Thanks, Denise. I think we have one more question. I don't know that we're going to have time for too many more. We're at 12:04, but Rebecca, you want to read the next question?
Yep. So this question is for Alicia, coming from Jordan. So Alicia, you mentioned that Connecticut doesn't give specific guidelines for feet for riparian buffers. Part of my work is to write review letters on solar panel projects for the CT Siting Council. Sometimes the solar developer appears to be clearing forest close to the river, such as 50 feet. I would like to give recommendation to say they should leave a wider riparian buffer. Do you know any resources I can use to back myself up to give such recommendations?
Yeah, the stormwater permit, the construction stormwater permit. There is 100-foot requirement for solar projects. But I think that certainly there's the science is out there, and I will put some of that on. If you go to the Rivers Alliance website and go to resources and Wild Edges Healthy Waters, there are some resources down at the bottom, and I'll put some of that there. And I believe also if you go to the Western Council of Governments page, go to their publications, look for the case for riparian corridors. That is chock full of references. You can probably find a lot there as well. And I can put the link to that report in there as well.
I've read that report. It's excellent, and I think it's a great source of the resources that you may be interested in finding. It's wonderful to have the COGS also be engaged in this as well. So let me see. We have one more question. I don't think so. Listen, I don't want to run over time for folks who put this together. We're happy to come back. I think all of our information is here. Please feel free to reach out to any of us. And with that, I'll just ask if our panel members want to make a final closing statement, and then we can wrap it up.
I'd like to just a couple of things. There's a new watershed tool that CLEAR has to do watershed assessments, and it really looks at riparian buffers. So if you look at that tool, and we can put that in the chat if I can find it quick enough before we sign off. Either that or we can send it to folks who signed up for the workshop. But if you go to CLEAR and look at watershed assessment tool, it has what you need to do on every on every parcel of land to protect and what you need to do within a watershed. So take a look at that. It's a great resource for anybody who's doing analysis. I also
So
just wanted to say
CLEAR and CIRCA both have a lot of resources, state governments, University of Connecticut. So a lot of good things. Thanks, Denise. Didn't mean to interrupt.
Yep, that's right. And I just want to say that the Water Planning Council has been doing a series of workshops on extreme weather in our watersheds. So you can go on the website that I'm going to share with you to look at all the recordings. But we also have our last workshop coming up on October 17th, which is, again, extreme weather in our watershed, impacts of drought on drinking water supplies. We always think about the flooding and the contaminants with flooding, but we also have problems with drought and severe weather on drinking water supplies, and that will be on October 17th. So I'm just going to put that in the chat. But all the previous workshops on extreme weather and our watersheds are also posted on that website.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for joining us today. We really appreciate the time. We appreciate this Resilience Week put together by OPM, and I thank everybody, all of our panelists today, for pulling this together with us. And with that, I think we'll sign off. So thanks again.